When Jack Babcock was 13, he witnessed the dawn of manned flight. 2 years later, he joined up to fight in the bloodiest conflict in history, the First World War. He was put into a unit of child soldiers, trained to fight as men, then forgotten by history. Now 107, Babcock has lived into his third century to tell his story. And one of the Great War's youngest soldiers is now the last survivor of Canada's 620,000 veterans.
Why did you want to join up?
It was something to do.
Now living in Washington, Jack Babcock grew up in a small village just outside Kingston, Ontario. At 107, he has outlived every other Canadian veteran of the Great War.
Well, I was born July 23rd, 1900. Queen Victoria was the Queen of England.
15 and a half years later, Babcock enlists in the Canadian Army with dreams of fighting on the front lines of a war that will claim the lives of more than 60,000 Canadians.
Why did you want to join up?
It was something to do. I got a nice uniform, and I was making $1.10 a day. That was more money than I ever earned in my life before.
Did you want to go fight the Germans?
Oh, I didn't know what the hell. I really didn't know what war was like, but
Were you afraid about going to France?
no.
Did you
No, I wanted to go.
Why?
Well, hellfire, gosh, you never think you're gonna get killed.
We don't know much about the underage soldiers because the records are poor. The youngest Canadian soldier that the government would admit to was 10 years old when he was enlisted. I mean, that's not something a government really wants to be proud of. We know that the youngest Canadian to be killed in action was 14. We know that there are probably 100 who were killed in action at 15 and 16. And when you get up to 17, you're probably into the thousands.
When the war begins, 21 is the minimum age for enlistment. But as hostilities continue and casualties mount, the age drops to 18 and recruiters are put under enormous pressure to fill the ranks any way they can. The Canadian government turns a blind eye as thousands of child soldiers are recruited into the Army.
I was in a little place called Perth Road. That was, I don't know how many miles, probably 15, 16 miles from where I was born. And there was a lieutenant and a sergeant came through there. And they were, well, they didn't have conscription then, and the Canadian Army was hard up for men at that particular time. And they'd take damn near anybody. So they asked me if I'd like to go, and I said, sure. I was 15 and a half.
The old story of the teenager who goes to the recruiting office and announces that he's 16 years old, and the grizzled sergeant looks him up and down and says, well, we'll walk around the block and maybe you'll be 18 by then. I think it probably has a lot of truth in it. The other factor is that the Army had reduced the height requirement, for example. So you could enlist legally at 4'11", which suddenly puts a whole bunch of 14, 15-year-olds within reach of the Army.
Jack's attestation papers clearly show his real date of birth. But a medical officer records his apparent age as 18.
What matters is whether the Army decides you're large enough, big enough, strong enough to do the job. So the apparent age on the back was much more important than the actual date of birth on the front.
A scrawny, 5'4", 15-and-a-half-year-old Canadian boy had answered the call to serve his nation, as had so many other young teens throughout the British Empire. On a 350-acre farm at the turn of the century, Jack Babcock is born to Anne Isabella Foster and James Thomas Babcock. Jack's father owns a prosperous lumber mill. With 9 siblings, 5 from his father's first marriage, Jack's family enjoys a comfortable life. But when Jack is just a toddler, tragedy strikes. Jack's future prospects are put in jeopardy.
When I was born, a young man lived on a farm. When he was 21 years old, his father gave him a team of horses and $300. And that was his start in life. But I didn't get that. My dad got killed, and
while helping fell a large ash tree, Jack's dad is crushed. The family is forced to split up, and by the time Jack is 15, he is on his own, fending for himself.
I was living at my half-brother's house, Manly, and we were cutting cordwood for an outfit in Perth Road. We were just barely making enough to eat.
The hardships that Jack now faces are briefly forgotten when one of the Wright brothers' early planes is brought to a nearby town. It's a chance for Jack to witness the impossible, human flight.
It must be pretty impressive for you as a kid to see it.
Well, it was. They were at the fairground at Harrismith, Ontario, Canada. The plane was canvas. In other words, they didn't have metal exterior in those days. They flew about 20 yards or 30.
That lasting memory may have fired Jack's imagination and his desire to see the world. And when the opportunity to escape poverty presents itself in the form of a recruitment officer passing through town, Jack jumps at it.
And they signed me up. And the next day I walked to Sydenham, and we drilled in the city hall during the winter. And then in the spring, we went to Bearfield Camp, and we stayed there for a month.
I think for a teenager like Jack, who suddenly finds himself in a big base like Berryfield, it's probably very exciting, a new experience, but I imagine it's also a little bit daunting and a little bit scary, because you're dealing with the training sergeants, who are typically professional soldiers.
Jack survives Berryfield Camp and is then sent to Halifax, hoping to be shipped overseas to action.
When they got ready to ship the outfit overseas, everybody had a physical. Well, I was physically fit, but my category was A4. I was underage. But for some reason or other, they didn't post my name with those who were turned down. So I put my pack on and got on the train. And when I was getting on the boat at Halifax, the company commander knew my status, and he had me step aside. And they put me on one of those army trucks, and I was wrestling freight. I didn't care for that.
There would have been hundreds of teenagers in the same position there, probably enormously frustrated because they had got so close to going overseas, and only to be found that their war was to be sent to Halifax to wait and wait and wait.
Closed captioning on history is brought to you in part by Disney Parks' Year of a Million Dreams. Come.